Hello everyone, welcome to MediaNama. In November, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, MeitY, released a new standard operating procedure for the handling of non-consensual intimate imagery, known as NCII, following a directive from the Madras High Court, who was hearing a case of a victim whose images were repeatedly propping up on the internet despite several takedown orders. The SOP lays out how victims are expected to report NCI, the roles of platforms and government agencies like one stop centers and the cybercrime portal, and the timeline for takedown, which they have mandated as 24 hours. Soon after, in the same month, MeitY also put out a draft amendment to the IT rules on synthetically generated content or AI generated content aimed to address the growing issue of deepfakes, where they mandated a 10% labeling of either the surface or the runtime of any synthetic media.
Hmm.
To understand how these frameworks work in practice when it comes to tackling online harms and NCI, the gaps that still remain, and the challenges that survivors still face, we have with us today Siddharth Pillai. He is the co founder of the RATI Foundation, which runs MeitY Trustline, one of India's key support services for the victims of online sexual harm. Siddharth, thank you for joining us. Could you just give us a brief introduction of yourself?
So, hi, my name is Siddharth. So, I am the co-founder, co-director at RATI Foundation. So, RATI Foundation works with victims of gender-based violence. One of our key projects is MeitY Trustline. MeitY Trustline works with victims of online violence and specifically on the issues of cyberbullying, where you're being harassed online, or with loss of intimate or private content, which is some content featuring you has gone out of your control and you wish to take action on it. So these are, and we provide about five kinds of support. One is we help the victim enable a content takedown. Second is we provide mental health support. Third is we provide legal guidance. And in the Bombay area, if you can't afford a lawyer, legal representation as well. And of course, social support and technical support.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'll just get started with the questions. So first of all, coming to the SOP that MeitY released, this is one of the first SOPs that specifically talks about non-consensual intimate imagery. So
Yes.
my question was, do you think their definition of NCII is adequate and whether it covers all forms of NCII?
So I think we can here in this for this question we can bring in both the synthetic media SOP as well as the NCII SOP, and there are two sort of recurring elements in both, and both cause a little bit of concern, right? So in both in NCII and synthetic media, the focus is on the file, on the content of the file, and how explicit it is. And what we notice in India, right? Like it can just be so recently we had a case of a girl who wanted a photo taken down just because she was wearing jeans in that photo and somebody had uploaded it out of context, but she's from a very remote area where women don't wear jeans. Now, such content, which is a majority of content, just a guy and a girl holding hand, just a guy and a girl sitting on a bike, just a guy and a girl sitting in a hotel room, right?
Hmm.
So such content are also NCII content, which may be non-severe in nature. So such content is of course beyond the ambit of these rules, or they are not being classified as NCII as per these circulars, right? Then the other thing is there is a devaluation of consent, right? Like if you look at like any sort of gender violence law in India, the sort of the consent of the victim is at the center of these laws, right? So it can be just a image of me wearing a jeans, but and not explicit at all. But if it is leaked without my consent, it becomes violence. And this has been the long struggle of gender laws in India. And finally, you had a series of laws that centered consent, but now with the series of laws that address the intersection of gender and technology, consent seems to be devalued.
Hmm. Okay, so along with consent, when in its definition, I also noticed, like in the NCI SOP, that they had specifically said female victims. So
Yes.
does this definition also hold grounds for, othering other minorities who might not, like gendered minorities, into getting justice or getting like takedowns under this? SOP?
Yeah, definitely that's another shortcoming. So, like just in terms of like the helpline calls that come to us, right? And specifically with related to NCII, we can say that like about 20% are male,
Hmm.
there is a significant proportion of like, individuals who identify as other genders as well. And then, this does not sufficiently capture
Hmm.
that gender spectrum and who all is at harm as well.
Hmm. Another question that I had about this SOP was they have focused primarily on the ways that a victim can go to get a takedown done or to get content removed from the internet. They have talked about one-stop centers. They have talked about the cybercrime
Yeah,
reporting portal. They have talked
right.
about going to police stations. They've talked about directly reaching out to the social media intermediary and what would happen to a social media intermediary if they do not adequately redress these grievances. But do you think there should also be something in the document or something that should be also kept in mind on how the government agencies involved need to function, like maybe a SOP specifically on how they deal with complaints of NCII or online sexual harm, and what are the shortcomings that you have personally seen when victims come forward to you about the government agencies that take part, that are responsible for these takedowns?
Right. So, essentially in all government communication and even in this circular, the idea is that like, go to a police, go to a government approved, like one-stop crisis center, and there you will get relief, right? And it's a very sort of simplistic thing that, if you just read it, it feels like you'll enter, you'll sort of like give some sort of complaint and all these like, redressal actions will take place.
Hmm.
But this is not how it functions on the ground. So there are police stations now, there are police stations that may face a challenge in registering an FIR when, like the victim is based here, but the perpetrator is based somewhere abroad. So they might like discourage the victim or like,
Hmm.
just take the complaint, like, ki, oh, your complaint has been received, but never translate it into an FIR. So there are gaps at the police station that needs to be addressed, ki,
Hmm.
how do so, when these cases come to the cops, how do the cops react? Right? What is the role of a victim? Now, for example, like, there are situations, and because we have also entered alongside the victims into these judicial processes, and we are aware of it. But there is no such material in the public domain or no notification of the government as to what role a victim has to play, right? So the victim has to go early in the morning to a police station because the FIR is going to take about 10 to 12 hours. So it's not a question of I go and give a complaint, right? And this is if you enter a police station, then you will have to give certain level of evidence. And sometimes the level of evidence goes above screenshots and also into submitting your phone. So the victim needs to take a backup and you will lose your phone. That phone is going to become evidence for the next 3 years. And by the time it comes back to you, the phone will not be working.
Hmm.
So this needs to be conveyed to the victim before they enter the police station, right? So I feel like, the role of the victim not being sort of, so the SOP makes it sound very simple. There are these five bodies. If you reach out to them, they will assist you. But there is a role that victims, like, have to play. There is like, there are duties responsibilities that they bear when you practically enter these systems, right?
Right.
Similarly, with cybercrime.gov.in, it offers an anonymous option. The anonymous option is great for registering a case and then escalating it to the grievance officer. But will
Hmm.
that result in automatic taking of action or taking down of content? No, right? So this needs to be conveyed as specifically. Ki you have to register it anonymously, but then take the complaint to the police station if you want post action to occur. One stop
Hmm.
crisis center has now suddenly come in out of the blue. We are aware because we work on ground cases as well. Ki one stop crisis centers are resource crunched institutions. So has there been sufficient capacity building? If I enter a one stop center right now, based on our experiences with on ground cases, I wouldn't be super confident that they will be able to deal with
Hmm.
a case of online abuse. So I think, just being more truthful, just being more like, it needs to be practical, right? Like now, when the cops get an evidence, we frequently see in different police stations, the police process the evidence in different ways.
Hmm.
Um, like in one, like, they are on the victim's phone and they share. We've had calls on our trust line where, the cop wanting to help the victim, has asked the victim to send some of the evidence on their personal WhatsApp number, because they probably didn't have clarity on how to gather the evidence. Now, is this safe? Is this privacy preserving? Like if something, if like the cop's phone is hacked, for example, then like, does the cop then bear responsibility? So I think there are a lot of sort of unclear um, steps in the system that could have benefited from a SOP that was more practical. And I feel like this, while it covers like an overall, like, good sentiment towards like a very urgent issue, I feel like, some of the practicalities are on the ground are left unaddressed.
Mhm. And talking about covering the issue, another aspect that I wanted to talk to you about how the government currently does this and what can be done better. The SOP says takedowns from social media website and the de-indexing of URLs. But
Hmm.
what happens in cases where NCII is circulated on closed WhatsApp groups or any closed messaging groups? For example, like the 2020 boys locker room case, like how
Yeah.
are cases A filed and B then taken down in those instances?
See, I also feel like one needs to be slightly practical, and which is why, like, like, see, you cannot 100% promise, like, at least that's part of our SOP at the trust line, right? You cannot 100% promise somebody ki all content will disappear online, I mean,
Hmm.
we've had, like, perpetrators save it on a hard drive, what do you do in such a scenario? So it's more than just like OTT, OTT messaging and all of that. And also, like, for example, like a lot of these, circulars, they only cover significant intermediaries, right? Which is platforms with more than 50 lakh Indian subscribers. And there is a ton of platforms that, don't meet this threshold, right? And de-indexing is also not taking down at source, right? You're just making it, you're just putting another layers. But, and that's a good step, See, on the internet, security is like an onion. So you need to have several layers, so this sort of like, focuses on just this one layer of like, de-indexing or URL level blocking, as the solution. And that perhaps is, is what is like, it's short-sightedness, like it should think long term. Like a victim, of course, needs content takedown. A victim also needs other support services, right? And in other gender-based crimes, like, in a one-stop center, their capacity built to address this whole, there is a social impact, there is a
Hmm.
mental health impact, there is of course, like this whole content leak impact. So you need to tackle all of these,
Hmm.
and you can't like say ki content takedown hone se this problem will go away, you know and while it's good, but I feel like, India already has a coercive takedown mechanism far better than other countries. So I feel like, this is a job that you have done to a certain good, like, very good extent. And now if you want to further address how victims are going to get redressal, then start focusing on other aspects of redressal as well.
Okay. Okay. So just one last question on the takedown process. So
Mm.
they have once again stressed the 24-hour timeline that in
Yeah.
24 hours NCI will be taken down, and they
Mm.
also introduced the use of hash banks, which will be maintained by I4C. So,
Yes.
in your opinion, like in the years that you have seen NCII takedowns, is the 24-hour timeline realistic? And do you think hash banks will be sufficient in maintaining that these images do not pop up again?
See, we actively use the government's grievance officer system and all of that, right? And there have been cases in which 24 hours takedown has happened. There have been cases where it has taken 2 weeks as well. And they depend on a lot of factors. And clearly, like, if the content is extremely severe,
Hmm.
if it features child, if it features like, penetrative sexual abuse, if it is extremely explicit, we have seen quick takedowns happen.
Hmm.
But like, if the content is less severe, if, like the harm is occurring by placing the victim in a certain context, then, action is slower. So I don't think it is not feasible, but I also don't think it is wholly new, The grievance officer amendment in the IT rules that pretty much brought this in, and this is kind of like a reiteration of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So again, this concerns only with the significant intermediary. So the other websites, larger porn websites, etc., they are outside the scope. So that continues to remain a challenge. And the second half of your question, hash values, I mean, see, it is one of the major concerns for a victim is my content should not be re-uploaded. And I think it does address like a gap that is there in victim support. Of course, how effective they are, I think there need to be audits, because there is a sort of like a level of tolerance, correct? Like if I send you a photo of me on as an attachment on an email, and I send you a photo of me via WhatsApp where it is compressed, those are two separate hash files. So,
Hmm.
like I can re-upload the content again if I pass it just through a WhatsApp compression algorithm.
Right,
Oh,
right, right.
yeah, so those challenges remain with hashbangs, but once again, I think it can't be a short-sighted like dash to the finish line. It should be okay, so hashbank is one layer, the
Hmm.
grievance officer is another layer, the 24-hour takedown is other layer. So how many layers can we put in order to ensure that the victim is safe?
Okay, understood. So, just ending the section on the NCI SOP, I just wanted to ask you, what is a wish list that you would have for what the government should add to the SOP or should come up with, or actually enforce what it is already put into law to
Right.
make the process of removing NCI and online sexual harm easier?
Right. So I think standards of evidence that victims have to keep, because clearly whenever victim enters any redressal system, whether it be a platform reporting mechanism or a
Hmm.
police station or a one-stop crisis center, there is a standard of evidence that the victim has to present. I can't just walk in and say ye mere saath hua. People will say kahan hua, kidhar hua, kab hua, right? But are victims aware of this role? Like should like if I go to like a YouTube grievance officer, the set of questions it has are completely different from a Instagram grievance officer. Shouldn't there be a common standard at which I can apply for content takedown? Similarly, when I go to a police station, like if I go to like for example, if you look at the NCRB data, I think Hyderabad has sort of registered about 60% of all of India's cases. So clearly Hyderabad is operating at a different level. I think Bangalore as a city in itself has got about like 5 to 10% cases. I'm sorry, I'm wrong, but I'm just talking like I'm these are not the exact figures, but
Hmm.
they are
Yeah.
inordinately huge numbers. Mumbai has 5 cases. So clearly, there are different demands being made from the victims themselves, and there is no clarity as to okay, I lost 10 lakhs online. Maybe in let's say Surat, this will become an FIR. But in Mumbai, the criteria will be 20 lakhs. So it will not become an FIR. So you should tell me, right? So I know what to do. What happens when I report to the cybercrime portal? It's great, but what will happen? There is no clarity on that. So I think when evidence is produced at a police station, how do they store it? How do they capture it? Will I need to give up my phone? So I think the SOP can really right now, I think content removal, I think we are far ahead of other jurisdictions to a point where from a freedom of expression rights, it's called coercive. Like even if you sing a song, a music company can take down your video. It's that simple. So I think we've done a lot of work in content takedown, blocking, but these other things of like getting
Hmm. Hmm.
justice, or getting like comprehensive redressal. I think the SOPs and should start focusing on those. And there needs to be a role clarification of everybody involved in this chain. From like now there is a mention of trusted flaggers. So what do these trusted flaggers do? Now we feel we may be part of this trusted flaggers as the helpline, but we don't really know. Similarly, like a one-stop crisis center, now it's a new function for them. So, will a one-stop crisis center be able to take on an online safety case with their existing infrastructure?
Hmm. Yeah.
So the one-stop crisis center now have this responsibility, but they don't probably know what exactly to do. So I think, like the SOPs now need to really come from like ground up as to like these are the cases are going to police stations not translating, cases are going to sometimes helplines and not translating, right? So there are challenges, right? And I think it's time to start addressing those, and not always like just focus on this one thing of like how to take down content as fast as possible. That is not going to solve everything. There are limitations to that, and that must be accepted.
Right, right. So coming to the second point in our discussion, I want, like you said, the internet is like an onion, it has layers. So
Hmm.
one layer
That is
that,
security is like onion.
yeah, sorry.
Uh,
But yeah, so one aspect that is now in the internet that is quite troubling when it comes to NCI is, of course, deepfakes.
hmm.
And the government has released a draft amendment mandating labeling of deepfakes.
Yeah.
But is this mandating enough when it comes to combating online sexual harm and NCI, or does there need to be a fundamentally different approach when we look at NCI that is generated via AI or deepfakes?
Right. So I think, see, this may be labeling, I think, is not for gender-based violence. Like, for example, like we've had cases jahan pe, people have made deep fakes, nude deep fakes. And I think the objective is, there is a certain level of like, like sexual dynamics, but the objective is also ridicule. You know,
Mhm.
oh,
Mhm.
here is a new and upcoming influencer. Let me just make nudes of her, and there will be a huge watermark because they'll probably use some free Telegram bot. But the victim feels a sense of ridicule. And the objective of the perpetrator is to get this upcoming influencer to post less and to harass her and troll her, which he is successful. Also to put like social pressure. So the family is not believing. The family of the victim is not necessarily believing that, oh, you have uploaded a nude online. What they're saying is, why are you putting yourself in harm's way? Don't make content. Na? Just sit at
Mhm.
home. Don't make the content. So I
Mhm.
feel like, again, this aspect is not being captured by the sort of like, the notice that was circulated. Another thing is like, even the whole Rashmika Mandana thing, right? That started this entire thing. It was not an explicit video. Explicitness was beyond the point. It was a sense of violation, ki some sort of like, dignity was hurt, some sort of ridicule was there. So I think even from the first case, there were those aspects, but I think, the focus of this again is on like, on the explicitness of the imagery. And it does not matter, very frankly, in gender-based violence, if there is a watermark or no, because ridicule may like like even like shoddily made memes like before AI, people were using Photoshop, and like the bodily integrity was completely disturbed. Like your chest is this big but your head is this small. But the did the victim still feel harm? Yes.
Mhm.
There we get like cases where people use the messaging app like crude drawings to highlight genitals and send it to victims. So it
Mhm.
does not matter that it looks crude. It is the sexual intent, and which a lot of like gender laws in India get. See, it is the sexual intent, it is the breaking of consent. And once
Mhm.
again, I think this circular, like, it does not sort of take that into account. Which
Right.
is why it may be more for a misinformation sort of a thing, rather than like, catering to like a victim who's looking for redressal for gender-based abuse.
Right, right. Uh, so when it comes to deepfakes and when it comes to AI generated NCII, you've talked
Mm,
about how these images, how these videos, they're used to ridicule victims or harass them or to maybe make them lessen their internet presence. So
yeah.
my question is from A to Z, from the starting point to these images being uploaded on the internet, what does the government need to do to does it need to stop people from accessing services that can make images like this, or does it how does the government go about this? Because one thing that we saw, we covered this week, is that on the Google Play Store itself there are multiple apps where you can post like photos of two people and it will generate a AI video of them kissing or them
Hmm.
doing some or the other, like not nude, but not extremely explicit in the government definition of the way, but it will produce two videos of people kissing and everything. So,
Yeah.
how does the government combat the creation of these videos and their dissemination?
I think it's the intent that needs to be captured here, right? Like with gender-based violence, like, like if, like I hug someone, it's fine. I hug someone without their consent, that's not cool, and that is a like a sexual violation, right? So I think, like, that framework needs to be put in place rather than, like, because pretty much, like, in terms of content creation and what I've really asked engineers about this, and they're like, the cat is out of the bag. Like,
Mm,
it will be same as porn sites in India, right? Like, you can have porn bans, but like, yeah, and you can limit certain visibility. It's pretty much like at that level of solution of how we are thinking of de-indexing. Like, yeah, that is one sort of layer, but it's easily, like, circumvented. But if we actually want to, like, ensure that victims are able to access redressal, and not sort of over-regulate, then once again, it needs to be the consent, the intent, these things in focus. It's not always just technical things, right? Because the harm caused to me is not technical. It's not like a copyright issue. It's a issue of, like, my dignity. So there are some, like, intangibles. So you cannot always measure them in tangibles, right?
mm,
Which is
mm.
why, like, consent was introduced as an indicator, or intent is introduced as an indicator. So I think in terms of even like AI generated things, while of course there is a space for technical solutions, without like consent and intent and factoring them in and placing indicators for that, you are not going to be able to solve this issue or ensure that the victim gets justice.
Right. So I'll just move on to my last group of questions. So I've also wanted to ask, when it comes to getting access to justice, how significant is like the gender, the age, the class, and the regional divide? Like the regional digital divide, you already spoke about a bit when it came to the NCII data.
Hmm.
But how significant is this? And do you think this SOP, the NCII SOP, will adequately address this?
Oh, I forgot to mention this, but like, like in a lot of platforms, the GO forms and including the government GAC form is only available in English.
Hmm,
So
hmm,
there itself, you can see the digital divide, and there is no
hmm,
pressure in this SOP to get them to translate to other languages. And this is just like a linguistic divide. What if, there are people who have, like, interrupted literacy, not very functional literacy, and they use voice to operate their phones. How do they use voice to trigger these controls?
hmm,
Like, similarly, like, when you're considering, like, specially abled people, will they be able to? So in terms of accessibility and inclusion, there is a lot that needs to be done with these systems, that are perpetually available to every citizen and gives them a lot of power. And these are powerful systems, but how many are able to access them? Like, can you fill, like, a GAC form without a lawyer? That's also a question. Even if you're, let's say, English educated, highly privileged, will you be able to fill that form successfully? So, in terms of creating access, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Then, in terms of, like, when you enter a police station, there are different layers with which, like, like the system looks at you. So, one is like if you're young, is the harm severe? So if you're like an adolescent, there is chance for, like, oh, did you also have the agency to do something? So that sort of suspicion comes in, and we've done a research with cops in, I think, early 2000, sorry, around 2020, regarding, like, how they look at children. And cops themselves have said the younger the child, the more we sort of ensure that, like, they're given, like, our faith and a trusted treatment. And the more they're older, and the more they skew female, the more we get, like, we look at it with, like, suspicion. These are like ingrained biases. Then again, in terms of, like, the severity of content, and here again, like, the circulars also, they fall into that trap. If it is more
hmm,
severe, it is more serious. Not necessarily so in all the case. Like, perpetrators learn, they decrease severity while knowing the impact on the victim is the same. Like, if I have your nude photo, but I blur everything, only keep your face, you will still feel hurt if I paste it online. But nobody else can see it's a nude, only you know it's a nude. So I think it's not capturing those elements at all. Sorry, I think I lost track with your question.
No, no, yeah, that's more or less what I wanted to know. I have
Okay.
one final question before we end the
Hmm.
interview. So,
Hmm.
over the next, say, 5 years, What
Hmm.
concrete policy changes would you like to see to make this entire process of addressing online sexual harms and NCII and effects, this
Hmm.
entire ambit more victim centric and more victim friendly?
Yes, so definitely access must be easier, and this from language to victim-friendly treatment, so everything that was prescribed in the gender laws as to this is a level of sensitivity that needs to be given to a victim. I think all that needs to apply even when, like it's a technology facilitated harm as well. So we have the provisions, we have like the techniques, but they've just not translated when there is an intersection with technology. Then of course, like in terms of standards of evidence, so I would like platforms and systems to maintain standard and systemic standard and very transparent sort of standards of evidence. Ki this is what you need to come to us with, and if you come to us with this will happen. I think explaining that process to people is extremely key, and that is just from a empowerment of the victim perspective. Second is of course at the police station, how evidence needs to be gathered, captured. I think that really needs to be an SOP. And this process also needs to be standard. In terms of platforms, I would like platform policy to encourage encourage them to broaden protected categories, etc. Like for example, like children of sex workers are one of a very harassed population online. However, they don't feature in any protected category at all. So I would like them to expand their community guidelines. Make sure that you're catering for local sensibilities. Make sure you're catering for local protected identities. And then of course the entire process to be much quicker, whether it be content takedown or it be like the justice system. Like we just finished our first case that traveled through the justice system, and which was a case of tech facilitated abuse, and it took 3 years, and that's just in the sessions court. Now the fight goes on to the high court, and then perhaps even higher. So I think it is unfair that when somebody leaks your content, you are stuck to a justice system for 10 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
So which is a huge gap. After, so this is a child who has gone to the who reported to a platform, but the content was not taken down because it was not severe enough and they couldn't get context. Then she entered the police station where she was victim shamed. The police started to pass it between two jurisdictions because the perpetrator is elsewhere, the crime occurred elsewhere, and the victim is here. So they tried shifting, oh, this is not our jurisdiction. Finally it came to a case. It took like about about the perpetrator was taken in by the cops, warned and left, which made him more brazen because abhi police ne bhi pakad liya but mujhe kuch nahi hua. So he increased this attack. Then it went to the police. Then it went to a case where after 3 years there was a conviction, but that's still not the end of the journey. So I feel like here is a victim who's ticked all your systemic boxes.
Hmm. Hmm.
She went to every source. You know, And, like, what is the joy, or what is the sense of justice if you're stuck to that system for 7 years?
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Siddharth. This was a very enlightening conversation on what more the government needs to do when it comes to tackling online sexual harms in India. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Prabhanu.